بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. Continuing in our lessons on Islamic dietary law and the fiqh of food and drink, we stopped last week in the discussion about the rulings of the hayawanat, the animals which live on the land. And we concluded which animals are permissible and which are not, and which principles we use. So before moving on to the second category of animals, which are the sea, animals within the sea, we want to finish a few points which we didn't have a chance to mention. For example, what is the ruling on animals like the mule, al-bighal? Because the mule is an animal that's born from a horse and a donkey. So here we need to ask, we know the horse doesn't fall into the 5 categories of 5 principles. It's halal to eat a horse. Hadith is in Bukhari and Abu Dawood and others. I believe the hadith Asma radiallahu ta'ala anha, that the Sahaba, they slaughtered and ate a horse one time. But the second thing is now, the himar, we said last week, the donkey is impermissible. So if they come together, what do we do now? So the scholars, they mention 2 things. Number 1, what's the ruling specifically on the mule? It's haram, by way of nas. So the 5 we mentioned last week, we have the first category of prohibition, of what we know when something is prohibited, by way of textual evidence. Hadith Jabir ibn Abdullah radiallahu anhuma, قال ذبحنا يوم الخيبر الخير والبغال والحمير. On the day of Khaybar, we slaughtered a horse, a mule, and a donkey. فَنَهَانَ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ عَنِ الْبِغَالِ وَالْحَمِيرِ. And the Messenger ﷺ prohibited us from eating the mule and the donkey. وَلَمْ يَنْهَانَ عَنِ الْخَيْرِ. But he didn't prohibit us from the horse. Hadith Sahih fi Sahih Sulaymaan Abi Dawood and others. So textual evidence that the mule is impermissible. And so we learn a principle then, as Ibn Qudama mentions in Al-Mughni, any animal that is born from an animal which is halal, or that other one which is haram, takes the ruling of haram. If we have an animal that's born from the union of one animal which is halal, and the other one's haram, the animal becomes haram. Why? تغريبا للتحريم. Due to the overwhelming or giving majority of weight and focus to the haram. Because Rasul prohibited the mule, and you could not argue it came from a horse. So that one we have textual evidence, but now we have a principle as well. So the other animals you can think of that happens like this, then we will rule the same. A benefit, we talked about last week the ruling on the elephant and the difference of opinion amongst the scholars. But I just want to mention this qissa that was narrated by Ibn Battuta in his Rihla. Even though we know Ibn Battuta is not the most reliable, just maybe another reason why it's not a good idea to eat elephant. He mentioned the qissa when they were in the Sri Lanka region. He says there was a king who lived in that region, in Ceylon, and his followers or his subjects and civilians. So on the way to their destination, they got very hungry and they found some elephants. And the sheikh amongst them, who was with them in the group, told them, don't eat this elephant. And out of severe hunger, they had no choice. They felt compelled. They went and they ate the elephant. He says then at that night, when they slept, the elephants came, because they ate a small one amongst them, a baby one. He said then, when they went to sleep at night, all the elephants came and killed each person who ate them, one by one. He smelled them and then he killed, except for the sheikh. When they came to the sheikh, they lifted him up and then they put him back down and left him alone, because he didn't eat it. And the next day, when it was found out what happened, everyone was amazed. And the elephants, they came and they picked him up in front of everybody and they put him back down. And Wallahu A'lam, it's often mentioned the elephant has good memory, so maybe it's not a good idea to eat the elephant. Even though we said it's halal, this is maybe a precaution. Wallahu A'lam. Tayyib, inshallah, I want to ask the question then, because we spoke about some of the qawa'id, so it's good to apply them. So we said animals on the land, we have rules. So if we ask a question, we should be able to answer. Mathalan, what's the ruling on eating a squirrel? We, in our society we have a lot of them, but this question comes even in the books of fiqh. So what do the brothers think? What's the ruling on eating the squirrel? Based on what we mentioned last week of the 5. Yeah? Because it's actually in the books of fiqh. What's the ruling on the squirrel? So we could say here, if we look at the animal itself, then we can find a better idea. So the ulama actually differed because they looked at the animal and they said, one group of scholars said that it's halal. Asl al-hil doesn't have anything that prohibits it. Another group of scholars said, if we look at it, it has some kind of sharp teeth. So they said that it has sharp teeth, so it falls into the wasf we mentioned before. Second category, any animal with fangs is prohibited. So the ulama had khilaf based on this. So what we see here is that this is quite common in the books of fiqh. You take an animal and the ulama have khilaf. Why do they have khilaf? Because they both are applying, both groups of scholars are more the same principles but a different look. So if we were to take this as an example, the group of the ulama who said it's haram, or the ahnaf, Shafi'i and the Hanabila, group of them. From the ahnaf, the Shafi'i and the Hanabila said it's haram. Why? Because it said the sharp teeth that it has, and that falls into the hadith Naha Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, kulli dhi nabi min as-sibaa. Even though the other scholars who said it's halal say, while it's true it might have sharp teeth, it doesn't eat other animals. Because we mentioned, what does the sharp teeth mean? So scholars, when they say sharp teeth, some say any animal has sharp teeth, period. Other groups said no, it has to yaftarish, it has to go and attack other animals. Otherwise, why does it have sharp teeth? From this, the scholars went to two groups. Those who said it's haram looked at this angle. Those who said it's halal said that it has sharp teeth but it doesn't eat other animals. And asl hil, origin is permissibility. And this was the correct opinion according to Imam Nawawi in Majmu', Ibn Qudam in Mughni, and Mardawi in Insaf. And so the correct opinion then is, it's inshallah permissible. But what if someone says it's mustakhbath, yani who eats squirrels? We would say that mustakhbath, what does it mean the animal is filthy again? We said to be filthy or considered filthy, it has to be harmful to your deen and your body. So maybe in our cultures we don't eat this, but other cultures maybe they do. So the bottom line is, it's halal inshaAllah ta'ala. But now we learn a lesson. When the scholars differ, now we understand why. Because they differ on how to apply these rules. And so whoever takes one of the two views, it has their reasoning. But nice benefit I want to finish with, and also a rule. That Ibn Qudam mentions in Mughni, volume 9, page 412. When he says that the sinjab, the squirrel is halal, he says here's a rule. He says, وَمَتَى تَرَدَّدْ بَيْنَ الْإِبَاحَةِ وَالتَّحْرِيمِ. Whenever we have a confusion about something being halal or haram regarding animals, غَلَبَتَ الْإِبَاحَةُ لَأَنَّهَا الْأَصْلُ. Then we give the weight to the permissibility because that's the origin. What is this about? Animals. So we find a wild animal and we don't know the ruling. Somebody will say it's haram, someone will say it's halal, someone will say this. So what is the conclusion? Whenever we are confused about an animal being halal or haram, we give weight to the permissibility because it is the origin. And so this can be a nice way to save a lot of difficulties and confusions, especially because we don't know all the animals on the earth. So if we find an animal, and some scholars may say it's haram because of this, some say that, you could say halal inshallah because that's the asl. We move to the water category of animals. Animals which live in the water. And when we call these kind of animals hayawan bahari or hayawanat bahariya, are animals which only live in the water. Only live in the water. So we're not talking about animals that live both on land and sea. Those are another category. The general rule for any animal that only lives in the water is that it's permissible. All of them. And we're going to mention some of the exceptions, but all in general. All animals that live primarily and only the water, halal. قال الله تعالى أحل لكم صيد البحر وطعامه متاعا لكم وللسيارة. Allah says, lawful to you is the water game and its use for food and for the benefit of yourselves and those who travel. Surah Al-Ma'idah, ayah 96. So here the scholars say, Allah says, أحل لكم صيد البحر. صيد البحر is water game. All of them are permissible. And then we have a beautiful hadith, hadith Abu Hurairah, radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, where the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, هو طهور ماءه الحل ميتته. And this hadith is reported in all the books of hadith, Abu Dawood and others. And the hadith itself is sahih, according to many scholars. Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, when it comes to the water in the ocean, the sea, its water is purifying and its dead are lawful to eat. Its water is purifying, and its dead is permissible to eat. Which means the animals which come out the water alive also are halal. If you found them in the water dead, it's also halal. So the water game, Allah made it easy for us. Alhamdulillah. Anything in ocean you can think of, it becomes then permissible. And this is ijma' ulama. Ibn Qudama says, as for what lives only in the water, like fish and the likes, then they are lawful without slaughter, and we don't know if any of difference of opinion in the matter. Al-Mughni, volume 9, page 425. So we have ayah, hadith, and ijma'. So therefore, this includes all animals which are like fish, crustaceans, like shellfish, shrimp, lobster, all of that, and mammals. So whether it be like whales or other things like this. And so for unlike the last category, which was the land animals, this one, Allah made it easy for us by two ways. Number one, all of what's in it is halal, except for some exceptions, which we'll see where the ulama khilafed. Or number two, you don't need to slaughter. So the water game, we pull it out, it's halal. You find it dead, it's halal. And so this is important. There's no dhabah there. Whereas the land one, you have to make dhabah. And that's for next week, the rule of slaughter. So we take a benefit. Which animals need to be slaughtered? That which lives on the land. That lives in the water, no slaughter. I mean, if someone were to say, how do we know if it's dead or it's halal? You pull out the water. And it's a da'if hadith, but they mentioned, كل شيء في البحر مذبوح. Everything which is inside the sea is already slaughtered. It's a da'if narration, but then the principle is agreed upon. Now the scholars said, with that being said, in the ocean there's so many things. And only Allah knows. وَيَعْلَمُ مَا فِي الْبَرِّ وَالْبَحْرِ. Allah knows what's inside the bahr and the bar. So inside there's some things we don't know what they are. So let's assume now there's some animals, and we know some, which look like animals on the land, but they're actually in the water. Examples. The sea pig. Jazakallah khair. What's a sea pig? Sea pig, the ulama, they mentioned this. Khinzir al-Bahr. What's a Khinzir al-Bahr? In our terms, like a dolphin, or porpoise, I think they call it. It's like a dolphin. The ulama, they call it a sea pig, because it looks like one. Or the sea dog. Kalb al-Bahr. In our terms, it's otter. Like an otter, one of those long kind of animals. So the ulama say animals that look like animals on land, but are in the water, what's the hukum? So they said, the correct opinion, halal, because in the water, it doesn't matter what it looks like. This is the most correct opinion, because some ulama said exempted, because it's a khinzir. But the reality is not a khinzir, it's a dolphin. And this is a side point. In the Western society, it's haram to eat dolphin. For them, it's haram, because they say it's an intelligent animal, etc. But then the one on the sea land is halal. So that we have to be honest sometimes when we look at this. What kind of hukum is this? So this is important. So now, what about animals that we don't know about? And then the ulama, they went so far as to say, what about an animal which is in the water that looks like a human? Insanul ma. In term, we call it today mermaids. ما حكم ذلك? And it's funny because the ulama actually put this in their books. If I have time, I'll mention some of the examples. And the ulama, some of them, they mention like a mawsu'a fiqhiyya. This is not even real. This is a methodological animal. Like if it was existent, what's the hukum? Half human, half fish. قول الصحيح هو حلال. حل ميتته. And the ulama actually mentions this, and many of them did. For example, you have Kitab الدميري في حياة حيوان الكبرى, which is one of the biggest books about all animals. Hafid ibn Hajar's teacher, he wrote a book, he gathered every animal you can think of in the books, Arabic books, hadith, fiqh, qasas, khurafa, everything he put in there. And the reason why, he just wanted to categorize them. So you check the animal and you find something. He says, إنسان الماء يشبه الإنسان إلا أنه ذنبا يعني إلا أن له ذنبا. يعني it's an animal, looks like a human except it has a tail. And Ghazwini said, وقد جاء الشخص بواحد منها في زماننا. And Ghazwini, one of the earlier scholars, said one man came with one of them one day. He found one. لكن في الحقيقة والله أعلم if it's real. Some of the scholars, they said, like we said, we don't even know if it's real. But if it was, هو halal. Why? Because they just apply the qawaid. Right? So if someone finds this in the books, no one should think, what kind of discussion the ulama are doing here. It's a fiqh. Sometimes you're discussing some things, and some people, they have this bad understanding. When they read some books of fiqh, they say, what are the ulama wasting their time talking about this? And because they're talking about ahkam. Not always talking about something which is real or not, but what's the ruling in order to teach the principles. So sometimes people misunderstand it as if the ulama believe this. They didn't say it's real, except some reported, but others said just the ruling we're talking about. So this is important, always have husn dhan bi ulama, because there's some people who, I don't know, when they hear this, they get surprised. And you can find in other books too, but we'll save our time. طيب, with this being said, the origin is any animal, which in the water is halal, except for now some examples. Because the scholars didn't debate it. What about some animals which they have the quality of being in the water, but they also have other qualities? So the best opinion is that if it's inside the water, it's halal. But if it's in the water and outside, then we have to give it a different ruling. That's a different category. And I'll get to that in the next category. Because some people mix between the shark and the crocodile. Okay, the crocodile and the shark are two different animals. Crocodile lives on land and sea. For Barma'i, it's a different one. But the shark is inside. So if someone says, is the shark halal? Correct opinion, yes. And it's enjoyed by many people, many cultures to eat it. Because the same hadith. طيب, so if we find an animal which is in the water, it's halal. Take it out of the water, it's halal. If it's dead on the water, it's halal. And some of the scholars, they try to make categorizations which are not correct. For example, they debated if the animal is floating on the water, can we eat it? If it's from the water itself, it's allowed. Even if it's floating. Because Nabi ﷺ said the dead meat is halal. So that includes sea fish and shellfish. We know certain madhabs like the Ahnaf, they hold the view that these animals are haram, like the shrimp and the like. But the correct view is, as we learned, there's no exception. طيب, what about the animals which are in the water? How do we consume them? For example, we pull out the fish from the water. Can we throw this into the fire or cook it live? People ask this question. Can we eat it alive? The answer is yes. Because there's no dhabh. It's already madbuh. So some people, they get confused. If I take the fish out the water and then I put it in a hot frying pan, there's two issues going here. One is the issue of how you're eating it, because it's kind of hurting the animal, it's painful. That's a different issue. But in terms of doing it, it's halal, because the animal is madbuh already. So some people, they confused it, and they thought that if I pull the animal out of the water, now I have to wait for it to die. It's already dead. So here I want to mention mas'ala. Ibn Qudama mentions, Imam Ahmad was asked about the fish that's thrown into the fire while it's still alive. He says, this doesn't please me. But we know when it comes to the jarad, the locust, which the Sahaba used to eat, Nabi ﷺ as well, they used to eat them and they used to fry them and eat them alive. Or even dead. So he said, Imam Ahmad, after he mentioned long point, he says, then why I don't like it is because تَعْذِيبُهُ بِالنَّارِ, you're punishing and torturing it. It's better for it just to die itself, then you put it into the pot or into the fire. And most of us, this is what we do anyways. But if we were to assume that you did this, it's makruh, that's not haram. Why? Because punishing the animal or eating it this way, if it doesn't have to be eaten this way, you should wait for it to lose all of its life, then you do it. But what about some animals which you can't, like the lobster? And many brothers, they ask, can we put the lobster into the hot water? فَهُوَ مَذْبُوحْ أَصْلًا. You took it out of the water, it's already slaughtered. So you can, because there's no other way to eat it. Imam Malik was asked, is found in Mawahib Jaleel, what about if we take the animal out of the water, the fish, and cut it up while it's alive? He said, لا بأس به, there's no harm. لأنه لا ذكاء فيه, there's no slaughter for it anyways. And Ibn Rushd explained nicely, when we see the animal jumping and feeling pain, he says, this is like when you slaughter an animal and after it's slaughtered, it's still moving. The blood is exiting. He says, that's what it resembles. The animal's already slaughtered because it needs water to breathe or to live. But then after you cut it or you put in thing and finally dies, that's the example of when you slaughter an animal and then you wait for it, the blood to drain. So inshallah it's halal because there's no other way to eat the lobster. You have to cut it or beat it or boil it. But because we know the principle, there's no slaughter, inshallah it's still halal. If someone could find a more humane way of eating it, فَهُوَ أَحْسَنُ, that's better. And the reason why I mention this is because some people, they mixed it too. It's not a land animal. A land animal, if you cut part of itself while it's not slaughtered, فَهُوَ مَيِّت. For example, if you take a sheep and you cut its tail, it's mayyit, that part you cut, because you didn't do dhabh. So don't mix that ruling with this one. These are different. طيب, now we have the last category, which we'll finish with today, which is the animals which live on land and sea. These animals, we call them barma'iyya, land, water animals. And these are animals which are like frogs, crocodiles, and a few others like this. What's the ruling on these? The scholars, they mention that these kind of animals also is hil, except for the ones which we have a prohibition. Because now we have the animal resembling a land animal and a water. So we'll give the example of one that's impermissible, which is the frog. Because of the nas we mentioned last week, there's some animals that Rasulullah said you cannot eat them. You prohibited killing them. If it's prohibited to kill it, it's haram to eat it. Hadith Abu Dawood, one doctor came to Rasulullah and asked him about eating frogs. Or using frogs for medicine. He said it's haram to kill it. So if you can't kill it, you can't eat it, because you can only eat it after killing it. So if there's animals like this, okay, the frog is not haram. Majority of scholars say because you can't kill it. So how are you going to eat it? If you're going to eat it dead too, this is not a water-based animal, they said. So the animals which are in the water and outside of it, the origin, all of them are halal except for what's exempted. What are the exceptions? Frog, crocodile, and this is where the debate was, and snakes, or poisonous ones, they said. Right? Even though snakes I don't think go in and out, but some said if it was like that. So the scholars, they mentioned the crocodile and they have a big difference of opinion. A group of them said it's haram. Why? Because it has the sharp teeth, and because it's in the land and the water, it resembles a land animal. The other group of scholars, which are many as well, said it's halal, because it's a water-based animal too. And they said since it goes in and out, it's halal. And so we have a lot of contemporary scholars and past scholars on both sides. So if you hear somebody saying it's haram, why is it haram? They said because this animal is not a land animal and water animal only, it's both. So we have to look at it. It has sharp teeth, it goes with the land. The other group said, yes, it has sharp teeth, but it's like the shark on that side. So you see now where the khilaf is. I'm talking big scholars in the past, the madahib and after. So in reality, it's a difference of opinion, a strong difference of opinion. And they differed because which side do we categorize it as? From there came the second difference of opinion. If the frog is halal, if the crocodile is halal or haram, what if I find it dead? So the group of scholars said if it's dead, it's like the other animals which are dead in the water. Bismillah, you can eat it. The others said no, it's not. It's a land-based, so you have to slaughter it. If it's dead, it's mayyit. So here we find that the scholars from that difference of opinion came to this one. What's the safer view? The safer view is, even if someone takes the opinion that a crocodile or a barma'i animal is halal, all of them, without exception, it's best not to eat it without slaughtering it. Shaykh Uthaymeen, they asked him this question, he said, that's best to go on the side of prohibition or of caution, and therefore it's must that you slaughter it. This is safer. Like if you found a crocodile dead, it's better not to eat it. Even if you said it's halal, if you catch it, you slaughter it. But if you take that view, but just to find it dead, this is safe, avoid it. Because scholars, they differed heavily, and we said in the beginning of our lessons, you don't want to eat something which is haram, possibly. So with that being said, these three categories now, it becomes clear how to deal with the animals. Next week, inshallah, we'll deal with the land animals and slaughter, because this is the most important. So the benefit we take from this categorization, if a water is animals in the water only, فَكُلَّهَا halal. All of it's halal, don't worry about it. If it's a land-based animal, origin is halal, except it's prohibited. If an animal is a land-based animal, you need to slaughter it. Now, next week we'll talk about rules of slaughter. If it's land, water-based animal, better to slaughter it, but origin is halal. So the key now is slaughter. And most of us, when we talk about slaughtering, this is where the confusion is. What about today's slaughtering system? What if I didn't say the tasmiyah? All of these questions we'll take next week, inshallah. So inshallah, this categorization is helpful. And always we need to remember the principles. And the principle is, al-asl fi al-ta'am, al-At'imah, والأشربة hil. That's the origin. Everything of food and drink is permissible. When it comes to an animal, you're not sure if it's halal or haram, it's still halal, it's otherwise proven. So even if we talked about the crocodile, somebody would say this khilaf, but if I go back to Ibn Qudama's principle, I can go with the permissible. How about animals which we don't have in our land, but it's over there in another land? Some will ask, what about the kangaroo? Shaykh Ibn Abdul said origin is halal. We'll go from the permissibility ruling. What if we find an animal tomorrow, we don't know what it is? فهو halal until otherwise proven, i.e. it has fangs or something like this. One more thing is, the scholars in this angle are pretty much, in the majority, they're in agreement on the majority of issues. When we get to the issue of slaughter, there is some considerations within something can go from its origin to haram. One more thing is, if an animal is halal but temporarily became haram, for example, the animal is halal but it ate a lot of filth. We said the jalala animal. It's originally halal, like a chicken, but it was eating a lot of filth. This is a temporary permissibility. You purify its food and it becomes halal. So that's why sometimes people, they mix these topics. We're talking about here the origin of food. But if we move next week, we'll see, you could take a permissible animal and make it haram because you didn't do correct slaughter. طيب. One last thing, there's also no hiyal. There's no hiyal in Islam. There's no what we call trickery. So for example, if I take a pig and I throw in the water, is it halal now? No, because it doesn't live in there. So this is important. Some people say, oh, if it's in the water, I'm going to throw. No, it doesn't work. The same thing, if an animal is found in the water and typically doesn't belong there, what do we assume? It drowned. It doesn't live there. Unless it's from there. That's why the ulama say it has to live in there. Because some people will say, what if I this? No, we can't do these kind of things. طيب, inshallah, we'll end with this much. If anyone has any question, we'll take them. Yes.
So the shark is still permissible even though it has fangs and sometimes eats other.
Good, yes. Because the scholars, they say it's in the water. Nabi sallallahu said, حِلُّ مَيْتَتُهُ. He gave a clearance. So some scholars who made it permissible, like Shaykh Uthaymeen rahimahullah, and Al-Sharh al-Mumti', he says the crocodile is halal, and he used the qiyas with the shark. He said if this one is more stronger than a crocodile. But then the ulama say the difference is that one is barma'i and the other one is bahri. Can't. And so yes, it is permissible because it's inside the water. So some scholars that try to do takhsis and say, wait, if it's in the water, it's still haram if it has sharp teeth, if it's poisonous. But the scholars say no. It's in the water, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said all of it's halal. But there's a point to be mentioned. If there is something in the water but is dangerous for our health, I believe there's some animals called poison fish or something, we will not eat those out of danger, not darar wa dirar. So even though it's permissible, if it's eaten and it's going to harm you, you can't eat it. But if it's a way to get the poison out or something, then you can eat it. Yeah. Yes.
If a land animal is sick, do we have to wait till it becomes better to eat it, or we can still eat it?
So we'll talk about that next week with slaughter. But this is one rule: the animal is sick and it's your animal, you can slaughter it before it dies and eat it. But the idea is that this is permissible. We have evidence for it. And others, they say that you can wait for it to get closer to death because you have to first try to heal it. It's mas'uliyah. You can't just. But if you feel like it's going to cost, you can do that. The scholars did mention that. There is something.
Back to that point of the animal which causes harm in the water, then the same could be said about the animal on the land, for example, like rabies. Is it permissible to eat it in that case? Or?
So this is a good question. What about the animals on the land which is permissible in origin but it has sickness, like rabies or something? Then we'll say we go back to those 5. So if it's something which is darra, harmful, then it becomes impermissible, even if it was permissible in its origin. Why? Because these rules help us to see that the benefit behind something being halal is to benefit our body and our deen. So it's important. If you find the animal which is halal in its origin, but due to something which is making it permissible, then we would say there's no harming and harming others. And so in Islam, these rules, they come together because at the end of the day, the sihha, the health is a priority. بارك الله فيكم سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك